Hi there berries, welcome to my season 13 support guide of brand support. If you're new to these guides, then we do all of these in one take, covering all aspects of the champion, including runes, summoners, items, abilities, ability skill orders, and at the end we'll do combos and interactions with brand. Now if you're new to the channel, I do a lot of League of Legends content, primarily focused for support, and we've got a lot of other support guides on the channel as well, such as champion guides for Lulu and Janna most recently, and Senna, but we've done other ones as well for like Morgana, Lux and Rakan and a bunch of others, and I intend to do more, so be sure to subscribe to the channel if you are interested in those guides. But today we're going to be looking at brand support. Now as you can see on the screen already, we've got the runes up, and that is the Dark Harvest rune tree. Now Dark Harvest might be a little bit unfamiliar to you, especially if you're new to AP mages, but it's a fun little rune kind of setup here that we've got that's primarily focused on snowballing, so getting a bigger advantage once we've got some kills or some assists, and the whole generalization of this is just you need to get ahead in lane and then you're going to stomp later on. So if you're new to Dark Harvest does a little proc, a little red soul orb will come out of a target if you do damage to them with an auto attack or with an ability, and that will then increase, it will do damage to the target, the champion target, but it also, every instance of Dark Harvest proccing after that will do more damage. It permanently increases the damage of Dark Harvest every time it activates. Cooldown on this is relatively long at 45 seconds, but it does reset if you get takedowns, which is kills or assists. So if you get a kill or an assist in a team fight, it's going to reset the Dark Harvest proc, and it just means it can proc multiple times in a team fight, which with Brand's passive, which we'll get into later, can happen quite often. Next we've got Taste of Blood. That's going to give you a little bit more sustain throughout the laning phase, and basically mean that you can stay in lane longer. So whenever you deal damage to an enemy champion, with a 20-second cooldown, you're going to be healing for a fraction of amount. Next we've got another one of those snowballing runes that we were talking about, Eyeball Collection. So every time you get a takedown, so once again that's a kill or an assist, you're going to be getting ability power. Once you've done this 10 times, you're going to get another big chunk of ability power. So just basically more damage the longer the game goes on and the more takedowns you're able to acquire. And another takedown rune, Treasure Hunter. So Treasure Hunter gives you more gold the more unique champions that you kill throughout the game, starting at 50 gold, and then the next kill will give you 70, then 90, then 110, then 130. So in combination of all of that gold, it will give you a lot of extra gold in order to buy some key items that you're going to be picking up on brand, which aren't particularly cheap, so this helps you get to those power spikes a little bit quicker. Finally, we're going to be looking at sorcery with the Mana Flow Band and the Scorch, which you're probably a little bit more familiar with if you are used to playing the support role. Basically, the TLDR is that Mana Flow Band gives you more mana regeneration when you land your abilities with a little bit of a cooldown. And then Scorch is going to give you some more damage during the laning phase in order for you to kind of secure those kills. And for stat runes, every single game you're going to be taking the double adaptive, which is going to give you more AP, ability power in the game. And then you got armor here or magic resistance depending on what you're going up with. If you're not sure what you're going up against, always take armor, as armor helps mitigate minion damage and turret damage. Next we're going to go into a practice tool and we're going to look at summoners, and then we're going to be talking very quickly after that into items. So we're going to go into a practice tool here, going to select brand, and then we're going to briefly talk about summoners. And pretty much every single game you're going to want Ignite and Flash, which is quite fitting because Ignite is fire, but you're basically looking for kills, all those takedown things that you've taken in the rune section, plus Brand is pretty good at killing targets in the laning phase and throughout the entire game, but you're looking to try and get that head start in the lane. So you are wanting to get the Ignite to help basically get kills for your team and yourself. So next we're going to be talking about items. I'm just going to give myself a couple of money here so I can buy some items. Now items for brand are kind of standard. You might recognize some of them if you've played AP before, whether that's like in the mid lane or if you've played some other AP supports. But you're going to be taking the Spell Thief's Edge. Brand is very, very, very good at applying Spell Thief's Edge stacks. So whenever you're landing abilities or auto attacks on enemy champions, you're going to be generating gold. And Brand is the best way, generates the gold the best. Just the way his passive works and how you get multiple kind of procs from landing an ability, and getting your passive counts as an extra ability as well. So you're going to be generating a lot of extra gold when picking up Spell Thieves. He's one of the fastest, if not the fastest champion at generating Spell Thieves edge charges compared to other supports. Now the next item that we're going to be going into is Sork's Shoes. Now if you know me, I like picking up my boots nice and early, and there's a good reason for that. Movement speed is extremely powerful in League of Legends. It allows you to dodge abilities, allows you to get in range to land abilities, and Sork's Shoes are very good because they provide you magic penetration. And the way penetration works is that the lower magic resist that the enemy team has, the more value that magic penetration gives you. So in the early stages of the game, it's extremely unlikely that many people are even going to have any magic resistance. If the enemy is a tank support, they might be able to pick up a tiny bit, but generally magic penetration is going to give you a huge damage boost, particularly against the enemy AD carry. Absolute must-have buy. But that is a bit more expensive than, say, something like the Boots of Lucidity, which are, if we can get the price up, it's 950 gold. So Iona Boots of Lucidity are 950 gold. So getting the Treasure Hunter helps kind of close up some of these gaps of these more expensive items that you are taking on the AP variant. Now there are two items here that you'll be taking every single game. I want you to take these two items every single game, especially when you're first starting off Brand. I don't want you to deviate from these items, okay? Promise me you won't do that? Okay, good. And that is the Rylai's Crystal Scepter and the Liandry's Anguish. Now, it doesn't really matter what order you pick those two items in, but the reason why we pick up those items is because they're just really, really good in Brand's kit. They interact with his passive, you know, with the spell thieves that we were talking about earlier. So Rylai's Crystal Scepter, it damaging abilities slow enemies by 30% by 1 second, but it also works with your passive, which we'll get into soon. But it basically means that you'll be able to slow multiple targets throughout the entire game for a minimum of 30%. That's huge to take note of. Also, it's relatively cheap at 2.6k. The big item, if you're able to purchase it early on, ideally you'd be trying to get this item first because it's Brand's biggest damage power spike. But if you are struggling in lane, you might want to opt into Rylai's Crystal Scepter first because it will help you get away from enemies and help set up plays for your team. But if you're doing at least average in lane or better, you're going to be going into Liandry's Anguish, which is your mythic item, and it's basically going to apply a burn effect whenever you land abilities. Also, you deal up to 12% bonus magic damage to champions based on target's bonus health. So against tanks, you're going to be doing more damage to higher health tanks. But basically, every single game, you're going to be taking the Rylai's Crystal Scepter and the Liandry's as your first two items. And in some cases, you might just finish up the game with just those two items. Now, for a third item, it's pretty flexible, and you kind of need to be aware of the item choices and the reasoning behind them, because it's kind of important that you take the right one. There aren't really any generic choices for the third slot. There are specific situations for each one that you kind of need to be aware of. So if you just don't know, go Void Staff. It's the cheapest item of the selections that you can take that I'm going to mention, but Void Staff gives you 40% magic penetration. Against tanks, tanks would definitely pick up some magic resist against you, and being able to knock off 40% of that magic resistance is going to be a massive number in order to be able to do more damage to them, because Brand is exceptionally good at killing tanks. He's very good at killing squishies for sure, but a lot of his damage will actually come off doing damage to tanks. It's kind of crazy how much he does. So making sure that the enemy can't mitigate your damage is going to be a big portion. So if you don't know, or if you just don't know what to take Void Staff. Go through the Blighting Jewel to get that little bit % of magic penetration first, and then complete the Void Staff. If you know you're up against tanks with magic resistance, you're going to be going Void Staff. If you're up against assassins, I would say at least more than one, or at least one extremely fed one, like a Zed or a Rengar, something to that effect, or even like a Master Yi jumping on your face that can kill you extremely quickly. You might want to opt into the stopwatch, then into Zhonya's, in order to have that stasis to prevent yourself from dying to assassins. The stasis is extremely powerful, but it will make it so that your damage isn't as high. Zhonya's is a noticeable damage drop off for Brand as the third item. So only take it if you really feel like you need that stasis. Ideally, you're avoiding to take it at all costs, really. One good utility item that Brand is very good at, that you can go in halfway to, then go into something like a Void Staff, is for anti-heal, Oblivion Orb. So Oblivion Orb, just having this one small 800 gold component will make you do 40% grievous wounds to champions for 3 seconds, and that extends a bit longer because of your passive. Now Brand's anti-heal capacity is enormous because of the amount of area of effect, AoE, that he has on his skills and abilities. You will basically potentially be able to have grievous wounds on all 5 enemy champions in a team fight for a considerable amount of time. And if the enemy team has a lot of healing, whether it's from their own kit, whether it's from items, whether it's like something like a Soraka or a Sona, you're going to be mitigating a lot of healing, which will basically, it won't go towards your damage number, but because you're mitigating like 40% of, say, like 2000 healing in a fight, you're basically doing like close to 1000 extra damage just from having that 800 gold item. So Oblivion Orb can be insanely powerful if you know when to buy it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend converting it fully into Morellonomicon though, not until like this like last kind of like choice, just because you're only really wanting the grievous wounds. The amount of damage extra from Morellonomicon isn't fantastic for Brand, so just sticking with just the Oblivion Orb is good enough. Demonic Embrace I generally wouldn't recommend for Brand. It's meant to be a nice like anti-tank item, but it's kind of a bait and I wouldn't really recommend it. But a good item, the overall highest damage item for Brand is going to be Shadow Flame. Now, if the enemy team is full of squishy targets, you're going to be getting a massive amount of damage from Shadow Flame. And the way Shadow Flame works is that it grants you a lot of raw AP, and also it grants you a huge chunk of magic penetration. So you're getting at least 10 magic penetration from buying this item, but it goes up to 20. If the enemy has recently used shields, you're going to be getting the full amount of 20 magic penetration. Also, the lower health, current health that the enemy champion has, if they get to 1000 HP or under, you're going to be having plus 20 magic penetration against that target as well. Now, but as mentioned earlier with the Sork Shoes, the lower the magic resistance that the enemy team has, an enemy champion has, the more value flat magic penetration has. Getting closer to that 0 number will allow you to do true damage to people. So if you can get down to that 0 number, which is very difficult, but if you can get as close to 0 as possible, you're going to be doing insane amounts of damage to enemy players. So generally you're choosing between Void Staff or Shadow Flame for your games, and if you just don't know, then I would just urge you to go into Void Staff just as like a safety measure, because it's slightly cheaper. You are losing a little bit of extra AP, about 35 AP, which is quite a lot, but having the guaranteed damage against potential tanky targets that you might not be aware of is more important. So Void Staff is priority, and if you don't need to buy it, then you go into Shadow Flame to get the extra damage through. So that's basically the item. The tricky bit is just choosing which third item that you actually want on the actual champion itself. I'm just going to sell my Leandries and Rylai's so it doesn't affect with the rest of the ability section. So for the ability section, we're going to get in a target dummy. We're going to get a couple in here. And these target dummies classify as champions, which is going to be useful for what I want to explain. So first thing we're going to be talking about is Brand's passive, and Brand's passive is the thing that you will be fixating on the most throughout the entire game. Brand's passive is his most important thing that you need to be focusing on. So Brand's passive, whenever you deal ability damage to an enemy champion, they're going to take a stack of Blaze. Now this stack stacks up 3 times. Each individual stack does max health magic damage, and every time you land another ability, the first stack refreshes and also stacks up to 2 and then up to 3. Now, when you hit 3 stacks on an enemy champion, they will have a red ring circle around them, and then they will detonate. And that can detonate onto other champions and minions standing next to them, and also then the damage will also be affected on that champion that you have dealt damage to. And it will do max health damage and a huge chunk of it. Okay? A huge chunk of damage. Also, this can be affected onto large jungle monsters, including epic ones. So this 3-stack component does a massive amount of damage to Baron and Herald and Dragon. And also it can be used on like the red buff and the blue buff, for example. So if you're like looking to steal a cheeky blue buff from their enemy team, Brand's actually very good at killing the blue buff. And like Scuttle as well gets affected by the 3-stack of Blaze and some of the large chicken and things like that. So he's very good at potentially stealing things like Baron and stuff with your abilities if an enemy team is doing it. He's very good at just taking away a couple of jungle objectives if you're near them. So if you like end up in the river and there's a Scuttle up, it doesn't take very long at all to kill Scuttle as Brand. It's kind of crazy, and your jungler will love you because the amount of damage you do on those neutral objectives is absurdly high, especially when you're picking up stuff like Liandry's as well. Liandry's also does a lot of damage to those neutral objectives. There's also a lot of spell interaction with your passive, so a lot of your spells get augmented if the target you're attacking is already on fire. That moves us on to our first ability, Q, which is our Seer. It's just a projectile that kind of comes out. I'm actually just going to give myself some more abilities and stuff just so that I can showcase all of the abilities. That'd be pretty useful. But yeah, so Brand's Q is just a projectile that comes out and will hit the first target that it hits. So it only hits one target. It does fire damage when it lands and just puts a blaze stack onto the target. Now, if the target is already on fire with a blaze stack, they will get stunned for 1.5 seconds. So just for showcasing, I'm going to Q this target dummy twice. You won't actually be able to do that in a natural game. But if I Q this target dummy twice, you can see the first one gave him a blaze stack, and then he's got stunned. That red ring around the target was that detonation from having 3 blaze stacks. So it's 1 stack. This is already on fire, it's stunned. 3rd stack, that big ring is that blaze explosion. And then if you pay attention to under the dummy as well, after the detonation, there is that black circle that kind of goes around. That basically means that that target can't get detonated again if that black ring is around them. So they can have 1 blaze stack on them, but they can't have more than 1 blaze stack while that's kind of like recharging, just to prevent like any absurd amount of DPS. But the cooldown is really low. It's only like 2 or 3 seconds before they could get stacked up again, more and again. So the 2nd and 3rd stack can then apply relatively quickly, honestly, even after they've been detonated. So back to the Q. Q, projectile. If they're already on fire, it's going to stun the target. Now the W, it's a pillar of flame. After a short time, it does a little delayed explosion in that circle. Now if the target is already on fire with a blaze, they take bonus damage. So here we're just going to do a Q to put them on fire, and now this W will do more damage than it normally would do. Next, we're going to talk about E conflagration. Now this is the easiest ability of Brand to use. It's just a point and click. So the point and click is if we E the target, they just get put on fire and take a little bit of damage. There is an AoE component to this, so if we put another target dummy closer, you can see how that's now spread to another target. But the range is very small if the target is not on fire. Now, as you can see here, if I hit this the E on this target, it hits this dummy just above it, but it doesn't hit the one onto the right, and it definitely doesn't hit the one all the way at the back. But if this target is already on fire, you can see how the range is much, much bigger. And you can see, like, if we use it on the middle one that's already on fire, we end up getting to hit everything in this entire circle. I'll explain later in the combo section how you can utilize this in lane to generate a ridiculous amount of gold and Dark Harvest stacks. Finally, we're going to talk about Brand's ultimate. Now, there's several different interactions with Brand ult, but the raw basic of it is that it does 5 bounces. So it goes bounce, 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 bounce. And you can see how it can detonate multiple targets and cause some chain reactions. So this target here, in this like kind of classic 2v2 lane situation with 2 enemy champions, if they're standing close to each other, that bounce is going to be happening a lot. That person that you first detonated will then detonate, and then because that detonate also applies a blaze stack to any targets nearby, because the target at the back had 2 blaze stacks, this one detonated into the back one's face, and then that one caused that one to detonate. So you can see how Brand can cause a lot of chain of reactions, and that was just from pressing one button. Now, if the target is already on fire, like in this case here, if they're on fire, the blaze stacks will actually slow the target, and the slow gets stronger per point in ulti that you get. So it starts at 30%, and if you manage to hit level 16, it's going to go to a 60% slow once you put that third point in your ultimate. Now, there's a couple of funky things that you can do, which I will mention here instead of the advanced section, because it's important to the basic knowledge of how the ultimate works. So Brand's ultimate, you can also use yourself as a conduit. So here, I'm just going to stand max range, and you can see how that did no bounces. So the first bounce, that's it. That first bounce wasn't able to bounce to any other units. It can bounce onto minions and enemy champions, but because there's no other enemy units near this target, there's nothing to bounce to, so it just fizzles out. But if you bring yourself close enough, Brand can use himself as a conduit to enable this target to get hit by 3 of this ability 3 times. So it's a really good way, if you're in isolated 1v1, make sure you stay near enough to the target in order for those bounces to happen. Now, I have to explain targeting on Brand's ultimate as well. It may seem complicated, but I promise this will be as simple as I can. So the basic way of how Brand's ultimate works is that it wants to apply blaze stacks to champions that already have blaze stacks in order to get that 3-chain detonation. Now, Brand's ultimate will try and seek enemy champions that already have a blaze stack in order for that to happen. So for this example, I'm going to hit this champion up here north with a Q just to put him on fire. Then I'm going to cast my ulti on this target dummy directly in front of me, and this target dummy at the bottom should not get hit by any ult stacks. Fingers crossed Riot's coding is implemented properly. So what should happen is that the ultimate will try and seek out blaze targets in order for them to be detonated with a 3-stack charge. So I'm going to set the first target on fire. Next I'm going to use my ultimate, and you can see that Brand's ultimate completely ignores that bottom target dummy in order to facilitate the fact of making this north dummy to explode. So I'll show that one more time. Top dummy is on fire, ulti on the first target. It will always look to try and get those blaze stacks off, and it's very important to know that that's happening in a team fight. So if you say, for example, you just had an engagement with like the enemy AD carry and they kind of like flashed away, it means you can just chuck your ultimate on a different champion that is nearby, and it will try if it's within range, try and seek down that person that you were just fighting with in order to potentially try and finish them off. If there were minions in between here as well, the same would happen. It will ignore the minions and just prioritize enemy champions that already have blaze stacks. If there are minions here and there is a champion in range that does not have a blaze stack, it will just try and hit any champion nearby. So in this case, it just hit the bottom one. because there were no other champions that had blade stacks applied. This kind of information I would usually leave in the advanced section, but it's a very core thing about Brand's Ultimate that you need to be aware of how targeting works. So just to go over Brand's passive and how it interacts with each ability interacts with Blaze. So I'm going to put that target dummy on fire. So Q stuns, W does more raw damage, E spreads out the fire to more different to more units, and Brand's ultimate, if the target's already on fire, slows them by a considerable amount. I'm going to go through the ability orders, and I'm then going to go into combos on how you can use these to your advantage and what kind of combo links that you should be doing during the laning phase and throughout the game. So in terms of skill order, you're going to want to max your W first. W is going to be your main poke tool in lane and your main source of damage, especially when the target's already on fire. There's a lot of raw damage coming from that. Also, every time you put a point in it, it's going to reduce the cooldown, which means you'll be able to use that a little bit more often in lane. Second ability you're going to want to max is your Q. The reasoning behind this is because Q is your primary, your only hard crowd control, and you're either going to get a kill from it or use it as a way of trying to get out of some certain situations. Every time you put a point in your Q, it's also going to reduce its cooldown. And then finally, you're going to want to max your E. Your E doesn't do a huge amount, but it does help set up for some of your combos. And usually you're only doing one round of abilities anyway, so you don't really need to get this down any lower in cooldown anyway. So once the target's already on fire, you don't necessarily need your E to then be able to set up for other things that are happening. So E last, and then obviously taking your ultimate whenever you can at level 6, 11, and 16. So next we're going to go into lane, and we're going to do some scenarios and things that are going to be happening throughout the laning phase. So let us teleport. And I'm going to teach you some combos and some things that you should be doing in lane in order to help you win your games. So when you're first starting out, you are trying to poke safely. Now, Brand's damage on his W early is quite nice, especially because you kind of got two abilities in one. You're landing in the ability, and then your passive is then ticking over, and that's going to give you a lot of Spellthief's edge charges. So for example here, I'm going to land a W on this target dummy, and you can see how much gold I'm going to get. So 1 W, 20 gold, and then because my passive then ticks for the first time on the target, I'm going to get another 20 gold. So every time you land your ability, you're getting 40 gold as opposed to most champions only getting 20 gold. So you're basically double stacking compared to a lot of other support champions. So level 1, you're essentially just looking to poke, W, relatively max range. Level 2, you're taking your Q, which is your stun, if the target is already on fire. You only want to use your Q if you land your W in this state at level 2. So W, Q, landed your stun. It can be used to potentially follow up, or say if they're looking to engage, you're being engaged on. Say someone's just jumped on your AD carry, you're just quickly, just trying to stun someone to get out of that situation in order to kind of disengage. Level 3 is where Brand's power starts to truly shine, because that is when you can start activating those explosions. So if you manage to land 3 abilities on a champion during laning phase, they're going to take an absurd amount of damage, not just because your base damage is quite high on your abilities, but also because of that explosion. So E is that point and click, putting someone on fire, and a very basic Brand combo, very basic one, is E, Q, W. So what happens there is with the E, they're on fire, Q stuns, W does the bonus damage because they're already on fire, and then you can look to, if it's on a squishy target, honestly in this situation, you're then putting Ignite down, and then you're looking to do some auto attacks, and hopefully your AD carry is following up, and then this person will be on extremely low HP afterwards or dead. This combo does a massive amount of damage. Now the downside of doing this is that you do kind of have to get in range for your E, which is quite short range. So the enemy team would generally have to do quite a big misplay in order to be in your E range anyway, to then be able to then get hit by a full combo, but it's not that uncommon, honestly. There are, there's lots of different movement mistakes that happen. Just one thing I would say is don't get too caught up on getting too far ahead of your AD carry in order to make this play, because if you're kind of isolated in a situation like this, you can see how far your AD carry is away from this situation, and if you get caught out here, you're going to be in a really bad spot, especially if they end up dodging your stun. Some safer poke could end up being from, say for example, the enemy is standing quite close to a minion. So say for example, in this situation here, pretend this target dummy at the front is a caster minion, and an AD carry is behind them farming. If you're actually able to E the caster minion, that puts the fire stack on, and if you know that's going to hit, you can kind of like preemptively just go quickly do EQ, so it doesn't give them too much time to react, and then obviously then at that point, because they're stunned, it's a free W to land and a free combo. So that's a more cheeky way to set up for that combination we just talked about, but not directly Eing the target. Because don't forget, as long as the AoE is applying, you're still going to be doing the exact same amount of damage to this other target. So, we're doing about 180 damage to this caster minion with my E, but it's also doing the same amount of damage to the champion behind it, because it's just how the spell works. It's the same damage, it doesn't drop off, there's no drop off from the actual AoE portion. So you're doing the same amount of damage, getting a very easy cheeky like blaze stack and stun that way. So generally, once again, in lane, you're going to be doing W, lots of Ws. Sometimes you can still find yourself in a situation where like the enemy is grossly mispositioned. So you manage to do your W, but then you manage to land your Q, and then you might as well just run up, auto attack, and then like run away again. Especially if they're already in 4 HP, you're probably not going to be able to kill them on one combo like that. But the downside of doing this, the WQE, you got the safety that you're further range away from doing it, so you're not having to get as close in with your E, but you don't get that extra bonus damage from the W because they're not already on fire. But if you are able to pull off this, it's more than worth doing it. It doesn't necessarily matter that they are on fire already. The amount of damage that you're going to be pulling off with that combo alone with just landing 3 abilities is going to be massive anyway, and totally worth doing. Now we're moving on to like slightly later stages of the laning phase, so we're entering into level 6. I do urge you to, if you missed the ability section, I do urge you to go to when I was talking about the ultimate there, because it's pretty important ulti information that I put out there. So if you've gone straight to the advanced tool and missed out on how my ulti, how Brand's ulti targets prioritization works, I do urge you to go back down there and watch that portion. But basically the long short story is it will try and always prioritize targets already on fire, and it will always try and prioritize targeting champions instead of minions. So even in the minion wave here, you can use your ultimate to engage, quite similar to how like we did like the W then Q, but in this time we're doing ulti into Q into W and then just throwing everything on, and actually kind of leaving our E till last. Like if we have the luxury of landing E after all of that, then that's fantastic. We're going to do it if we can do. The reason why we do E last is because this combo, the stun starts to wear off at this point, and you don't want the enemy to necessarily to retaliate onto you. So gauge the situation, and you might only be able to do like ulti QW before you have to kind of like dip away and escape. But you can totally use this to engage. Like even if the enemy team have just come back into the lane and they're kind of stacking up a little bit on top of each other, the AD carry and support, you can totally get away with doing this. You don't have to look for your ultimate as a way to getting kills. If you do this combo and you put them both at 40% HP, they're going to have such a hard time farming. And if they can't farm, they're just wasting their time in lane. And if they end up recalling, they end up missing experience and gold from being away from the lane. So I do kind of urge that, you don't have to use your ultimate as a way of like killing someone as you might do with some other ultimates in the game. If you can get them down to like pretty low HP as soon as they come back into the laning phase, that's going to be worth it entirely, and it's going to give you a lot of lane pressure. The only thing is though, I will say that if you end up doing that, just do make sure you have the river and stuff warded, because it will mean that you're probably going to be like under their turret a lot more, because they're going to be hiding under their own turret and not coming out as much. Let me think. So gold generation in lane as well is another thing, and not only just gold generation, but proccing off dark harvest stacks and getting like mana flow ban stacks is going to be important, particularly if the enemy players are playing pretty defensively. Now if the enemies are playing pretty defensively and pretty far back, you do have one way in terms of making gold. And don't forget, every time you land an ability in Brand, you're going to get that plus 40 gold if you've got at least 2 of those Spell Thief charges. And it is the QE trick. So what we're going to do is, because the mana cost on our Q is only 50 mana, and we'll only have 1 point in E Enduring Lane, so that's going to be 70 mana. So this combo does cost 120 mana. It's not necessarily the cheapest thing to do in the world, but if you are trying to get a cheeky Dark Harvest stack, or just some extra gold so you can get your ward item completed as quickly as possible, then you want to do a Q onto a minion and then E that minion to then spread that blaze quite far away, and usually it will hit an enemy champion. If they're low on health already, you're going to proc a Dark Harvest stack, and that's obviously going to help the scaling with that. You're going to proc Mana Flow Bland, you're going to pop Taste of Blood as well if you need a little bit of extra HP, and obviously the gold generation that we were talking about earlier. So you might have to utilize this a couple of times in lane. When I'm playing Brand, I'll probably end up doing this 2 or 3 times in lane. You know you're looking to end up recalling at some point anyway, and you got a bit of extra mana, and you're just like, okay, well, I'm going to get plus 40 gold and whatever, and just be on the rest of my day. Minor harassment like that can get you that ward item sooner, which can make all the difference in terms of making sure that you're aware where the enemy jungler is, so that you're in a good position to go aggressive when you want to be. So really, really important that you utilize that kind of Q onto a minion, and then E to kind of spread out the fire. One tip in lane is, do not just spam out your Q to harass. Because the problem with doing this is that if your Q is on cooldown, you are opening yourself up to a window where the enemy team can engage, and you can't hard crowd control someone. Especially if you don't have your ultimate, so you technically won't be slowing anyone. You are going to be putting yourself and your AD carry in a very, very vulnerable spot. So try and only use your W for harassment. If the enemy team looks to engage, it's going to be the EQ to try and get out of a sticky situation, or in some cases, if you have to, like that WQ. Say if like the jungler's trying to path down, it's like your last kind of resort to try and stop anything from coming over onto you. So try and refrain from spamming your Q as much as possible in the lane. The exception would be kind of similar to like the QE combo, when you know the laning phase is just, you're about to recall and you're just going to chuck it out just to, and you know the enemy jungler isn't nearby, just to get like a mana flow ban stack or whatever if there's nothing to E onto. That's okay, but I want you to try and refrain from doing that as much as possible when you're first playing Brand, because I've seen a lot of Brand players just chuck out their Q randomly, and it's just opening them up to being wrecked, honestly. So that's what the number one mistake that Brand players make. Other than that, in team fights, it's literally all about trying to land as much AoE as possible, as quickly as possible before you die. So Brand is extremely squishy. He's very, very fragile. His amount of damage, though, is absurdly high. Honestly, even if you die, if you manage to land down everything, you're probably going to get a kill. You're going to get a bunch of other players down lower. You might end up setting up your team for like a whole ace, honestly. In some cases, I've been like the only one dead, but like 4 of the enemy team have died, and your team's then able to get Baron and stuff. You will be sacrificing yourself a lot as Brand. The priority in every team fight is, if you are getting jumped, or if there's like a cluster of people, you always just want to chuck down your ulti first. Just get that going and ramping up. And then honestly, in a big cluster fight, it's going to be either a Q if there's someone already on top of your face. If someone's not quite on top of your face, then you're doing your ulti into E to spread that fire out as much as possible. You're getting as many blaze stacks as many people as possible to increase the chance of getting multiple passive detonations on as many different players as possible. So ideally it's ulti into E, and then it's usually a Q into a W to help guarantee landing your W if the target's stunned. And in this case, you could end up dying because of, like, you know, just the way that things are and you're being heavily focused down. But if you're able to land literally every single ability, you're going to be doing more than enough damage for hopefully your team to clean up if you are getting caught when it's like your team is still relatively nearby. There is one really hard thing that you can do on Brand, which I might struggle to showcase a little bit, but it's the QE stun. So that's from doing Q, flash, then E. It's pretty difficult to I haven't done it for a little while, if I'm completely honest, but there is a little trick that you can do. So what's going to happen is that you're going to send out your Q, and then because your Q hasn't quite landed on the target, if you can get in range to then E just before, because your E is instant, if you get in range of your E before an instant cast it just before your Q lands, it ends up being an extremely quick combo. So you can kind of do this at like max range. So it'd be Q flash E. I wasn't able to pull it off. I wait until the blaze comes off. I'll try it one more time. Too slow again. There we go, I did it! But yeah, it's pretty difficult to actually pull off. I've seen a couple of extremely good Brand players pull it off, but it is very risky, as you can see, because the margin of error is extremely small. So that's Q, and then just before like the Q lands, you're then doing the E. It's very difficult to do. It might be something that you might want to spend if you played a lot of Brand, and just practice for doing it for an hour. I haven't practiced doing this for an hour because I have a life. But if you really want to get every drip of possible power from playing this champion, you might want to learn this combo. It is not essential to playing the champion whatsoever. I'm not expecting anyone watching this video to consistently do this play, but it is something that you can potentially do to kind of catch out someone. But it is mechanically one of the hardest things that you can do in League, and that's even with me on 14 ping. So I know I'm getting old at my ripe age of 31, but I'm sure there's someone out there that can probably do it on a consistent basis. But that is everything that I kind of wanted to showcase for Brand. I hope I showed you some tips on how to utilize Brand's kit in order to get more gold generation, more Dark Harvest stacks, and more ways in order to get more wins out of Brand. I hope you learned something new with this guide, and I hope this guide helps you out in learning how to play Brand. As I said at the start of the video, I've got more support guides coming, and I've got other support guides on the channel as well for League of Legends. So be sure to subscribe. If you have any questions, feel free to leave something down in the comment section down below, or ask on discord.gg/Bizzleberry. We've got something like 3,000 support mains on the server. Just make sure you verify your account when you do join the server, as we have a method of making sure that bots don't join on the Discord. Or I also stream at twitch.tv/Bizzleberry, where you can also ask me any questions that you have there relevant to League or gaming in general. So yeah, all the best, berries. Take care, and look forward to a new video coming out very soon. All the best.